Welcome, V, to Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled to have this time to speak with you about your gorgeous new book, Reckoning. I can't wait to talk about the ongoing mindfuck of this century, among other favorite phrases and concepts you'll find therein. This is a book Kirkus calls elegant and timely, among other winning words. And I guess let's just begin with, how did this book come to be?
Well, it's kind of 45 years in the making, but I think in terms of why it came to be at this moment, I think it had a lot to do with COVID. I think for many of us who were blessed and lucky enough not to be on the front lines, and who were kind of locked into our houses, it became a time, I think, of deep, deep contemplation, accounting, and reckoning. And on so many different levels. For me, it was kind of this both beautiful and toxic nostalgia that was kind of running through me personally. But then there was also what was happening politically and in front of us, whether it was looking at the utter failure of this country to deal with COVID and all the things that happened in the early days when we witnessed nurses dressed in garbage bags, right, and wearing masks multiple times, or whether it was just seeing the systematic undoing of a healthcare system that was never really there in the first place, because we've never thought about health and supporting health in America and providing health in America. And so there was that whole thing that was happening, and the thousands of people that were dying so quickly. And then there was those 9 diabolical public minutes of the knee on George Floyd's neck, which were another form of breathlessness. And then there was climate change, which was happening with fires and all over the West and Northwest, and all those birds falling from the sky who were dying because of their efficiency to breathe. They were just literally inhaling toxic fumes. And it just seemed like everything was in front of us, right? It was right there. The story of this country of unexamined, unprocessed, undealt with history, whether, it's the origins of this country and the complete desecration of the indigenous people and the removal of them from their lands, which they so gorgeously were stewards of, and the genocide that followed, and then the 400 years of slavery that followed after that, and the Jim Crow and mass incarceration, and the horrible disrespect for nature and the extraction we have been doing over and over and over in this country through oil, through all the different ways we have ruined and continue to ruin this earth. And I think it was just clear that we were at a point of deep, deep reckoning if we were going to go on and if we were going to survive. So it just occurred to me, maybe I could look at my work over the years and work that I was working on at that time and see if there was a way to organize it and arrange it so that we might actually delve into what it means to reckon, what do we have to reckon with, and why are we so afraid to reckon?
Yes. First of all, thank you for that gorgeous answer. I'm exploding with questions now for you, but I think I want to kind of contain that, kind of a contained blast, and return to the words that you introduced the book with. If I might, you write, this book is about slowing down and assessing and looking, really looking. It's about accountability and discomfort. It's about remembering and honoring the most vulnerable and the most vulnerable moments. It's about lost love and craving touch in our aloneness. It's about tearing down walls and wondering why we build them. It's about the time of AIDS and a world of endless femicide. It's about grief, trauma, a raging virus, and writing. It's about reckoning. America has never been big on reckoning. We follow up a little bit later. First of all, let's define it. Or what do we mean when we say reckoning in this conversation?
Well, for me, reckoning is accountability. Reckoning is looking squarely at something and taking responsibility for it, allowing whatever that moment was to pierce you and to change you and to take it into such deep account that there is the possibility of transformation and change. I also say in the book, America's never been big on reckoning. We're like a criminal on the run. We're always running past ourselves. And that takes many forms.
Yeah.
But I think in a way, what the time of COVID kind of did is landed us in the kind of the mess of our unreckoning, right? It was just so glaringly obvious. And I think we're still there. I think there were huge attempts after that to begin, whether it was looking at white supremacy and the history of it and police murdering Black bodies or all the things, or looking at our racial history that had never been taught properly or truly, right? There have been all kinds of attempts since then to reckon with it. And of course, there's been an incredible pushback against that, because to reckon means you have to feel pain. You have to address the wound. You have to address the place of sorrow, the place where you may have caused harm, where the people who you are associated with as a white person, you have to look at that history that you are carrying and that history you have benefited from. And that is painful.
Yes.
And it requires kind of going into the wound, which in my mind and experience has always been a kind of portal, which if you allow yourself to go into it, you can come through the other side. But we sit on this side of that wound and we just expand the wound and deepen the wound rather than saying, let's address what has happened here. And there's so many aspects of that. I would say that addressing what's happened to women, addressing what's happened to transgender people, addressing what's happened to anybody who isn't lined up in the man-woman binary, right?
What's the importance of specificity in this address? What's the importance of the details, the very real details in teaching these histories and moving forward?
I think it's such a great question. You know, when I wrote The Apology, which was the last book I wrote, which was where I had written the apology to myself that I had always longed for from my father who had sexually and physically abused me, I realized that one of the key steps of any apology is the detailed accounting, because you cannot escape the detailed accounting. If you say, I'm sorry I hurt you or sorry I've abused you, you can escape everything. But when you actually say, I came into your room at 3 a.m, night after night, and took down the blankets and took your underpants off and then you are stepping into real reckoning and real accountability. And I think as a survivor of enormous violence and misogyny, I know for me that when someone actually owns the details of what they have done and speaks them, there is an alchemy of liberation, an alchemy of apology, an alchemy of reckoning that happens in your body where you get freed from whatever that deed was. And I don't think you get freed until there is a detailed accounting, because I think we hold the details like particles in our bloodstream, in our cells, in our country, in the story of this country. And there's so many amazingly brilliant books that have been written, whether it's 619, whether it's reparations, whether it's looking at all the incredible stories about slavery that have been told over the last 2 years. And they're so specific. And you can turn away, but they're asking you not to turn away. They're asking you to look at it, to see it, to understand it. We didn't just get here out of nowhere. And we're still here.
Yeah.
Like I just read today, already in 2023, there have been 3 murders of Black people in California. We're mid-January. They haven't stopped.
Right. That just like rings a bell for me. And I found so much to really just love and admire in Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that.
Yes, it's amazing.
It's amazing. And he is so specific. And I'm realizing that that's a big part of the power of that book too. He really takes you to those places where all of these people were enslaved and abused and tortured and raped and killed. And we're bearing witness and we're learning the real history of those places and those people.
I think that is what we have got to be prepared to do on every level. But in this country, we are so untrained at looking at it. This is a country of diversions and escapism and entertainment and consumption. It's not a country that has ever been comfortable looking straight at it. And I've certainly known that for most of my life because I've been trying to get people to look at things they have no desire to look at, right? Particularly focusing on violence against all women and the impact of that violence and the specificity of that violence and the specificity of what that violence does to women in a long-term, short-term way. I think we are either going to continue in our denial, in our escapism, in our pushback against the truth to the point where this country just is finally erodes and just is no longer possible, or we're going to get brave together and we're going to start looking and listening and hearing and really being interested and curious about the truth.
In this book, you identify as a passionate absurdist. What does that approach to living require of you, or of one, to be a passionate absurdist?
Well, so often people say, how do you keep doing this work when, I've been working to end violence against women day in, day out. I would say sometimes 8 to 12 hours a day for 25 years. And, here we are at the 25th anniversary of V-Day, the movement we started during the Vagina monologues. And look, we've had many victories. We've had great successes. We can say the word vagina now. Violence against women is a front page issue and no one would even talk about it before. There was a Me Too movement that followed all of the work we did. And I feel like I'm part of a legacy of women who came before me, the Rosa Parks and the Take Back the Night and all the feminists and, women who came before me. And it's a chain. We've opened shelters. We've opened a safe house in Kenya and a city of joy in Congo. We've changed laws, but we haven't dismantled patriarchy and we haven't ended violence against women. Until we dismantle patriarchy, we will not end violence because violence is a methodology that sustains patriarchy. So people say to me, how do you keep going? How do you keep going? And, I wouldn't call myself a quote optimist, but I see the absurdity of it all on some level. And I love Beckett, for example. I can't go on. I must go on. I will go on. I feel this is what we're here to do. We're here to change human consciousness. We're here to end and dismantle these systems, patriarchy, which has given birth to capitalism, which gave birth to imperialism, which gave birth to racism, which gave birth to colonialism. We're here to unravel and dismantle those systems so that everybody is free. Everybody gets a share of the wealth. Everybody gets to get educated. Everybody gets a good life. Everybody gets to live without fear and dread that they're going to be shot or raped or undone. That's our work. And so some days it's harder than others. Some days you feel like it's just impossible. But, there's a beautiful song phrase in Nicaragua that struggle is the highest form of song. And I have that over my desk, that slogan. And it just reminds me is like, we're here to be in this struggle. We're here to be in solidarity in this struggle. We're here to keep going until we are living in the world that is the world which is the best and the freest and the safest and the most joyous for the many.
Right. And that worthy work is hard work and it can bring you down, but it can also lift you up. There must be ecstasy in it. There's humor in it when there's sorrow too. It's everything.
Well, it's interesting. I've been working on a new piece and the character is a highly sensitive person like myself. And I never really knew what a HSP was. And I've just been doing all this reading about it. And it's fascinating because it completely describes who I am. And I always thought I was like a little bit crazy. And it actually says that HSPs are not crazy at all. In fact, they're needed in the culture because they feel and they see what's really going on so they can keep alerting the culture to wake up. And one of the things that is really clear is that the way you transform and direct your energy is into action, into doing something that is going to change the situation and the condition that you are living in. So for me, doing the work I've done in the world, being a part of a worldwide movement for 25 years with the most extraordinary women and men on the planet who are in the trenches every day fighting to stop sex slavery and female genital mutilation and exploitation of workers and rape and battery, and who are giving their lives to this with passion and humor, which you must have if you're going to do this work. To be in that network, to be in that movement of solidarity is the greatest gift in the world. There's nothing better. I can't imagine what would be better. So to me, that's where joy is. That's where hope is. That's where possibility lies.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it was so hideous, especially in the early days of this pandemic. You write about what will happen to touch and how, oh God, I felt so bereft in the early days of the pandemic. But also like what you're describing is like the ecstasy of existing in community, of the collective consciousness and being. And, and that's frankly the only way for us to really realize the power to make the changes that we want to see.
It's so true. And I think often in this country, because of this, quote, historical rugged individualism, and then the days of Reagan, I hold him permanently responsible, forever responsible for the downfall of America, because he ushered in this time of like, you do it for you, you get what you want, step over anyone to get it. All of those days where what we had built as a kind of collective infrastructure where there was a sense that we were responsible for each other, he just annihilated. And we've never really recovered from that. And I feel blessed because I've worked in this movement for 25 years. So I know women around the world who are my sisters, who I know like they are my family, and we know how to work together, and we know how to make things happen, and we know how to get laws changed. We know how to get people to rise up. We know how to struggle. We know how to love. We know how to dance. We know how to be in this world together. And I feel for people who are so desperately isolated in this country because there's so much loneliness here. There's so much competition and comparison, particularly with social media, where people feel bereft and alone and not enough because they're not linked to organizations, they're not linked to movements where you find your worth, not in your separateness. You find your worth in your connection and your collectivity.
Does reckoning necessarily lead to revision then?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I think they are rather simultaneous.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can truly reckon with something and not be changing in that moment. If you're really reckoning.
Right.
Looking at something you've done, for example, that has harmed someone and really looking at it in the details of it. I made a lot of apologies over the course of COVID. I examined a lot of relationships I was in and had time to really see where things had gone wrong and what was my responsibility, which I had never really taken time to do because I was always so busy working, doing, making, creating, pushing forward in that truly driven American way. And I think what COVID allowed me to do is say, wait, we have this time. Why don't we go in and really look at things and do a clearing and do a cleaning out of who you've been and who you were. And look, we can only be as conscious as we are. We all grow up in this, but once you are conscious, you are responsible. So I made a lot of amends and it felt amazing. And I don't feel like I have very much baggage anymore. So that's allowing me to do much more work in the world because I'm not burdened with that underlying guilt, that shame, that self-hatred that is always nagging at you when you don't reckon with the things you've done.
That kind of apology, the one with the power to unburden, the power to heal, do you see it as being a specific sort of mechanism or having a narrative arc to it?
Well, I did this TED Talk after I wrote the apology, like kind of the 4 steps of apology, which is actually in the reckoning. It's in reckoning. It's called The Alchemy of the Apology. And I think that I only came to realize this, after Me Too happened, it suddenly occurred to me that there were all these men who had been called out, but there hadn't been one who had made a public apology for anything, or one who had seemed to reckon with anything or taken accountability. I can't think of one. And I suddenly started looking historically, has any man ever publicly apologized for sexual abuse? Couldn't find one. And then it really hit me that maybe the non-apology is actually a column holding up patriarchy. Maybe it's one of the major tenets of patriarchy. And I think I'm onto something there.
Yeah.
And I think a true apology is as deep or profound as prayer, as meditation, as anything we are taught to do as children, but we are not taught how to apologize. Because in fact, men are taught that to apologize is a sign of weakness, is a sign of becoming vulnerable, of humiliating yourself, giving away your power. And I think honestly that there is nothing more freeing, more liberating than a true, deep 4-step apology, right? Where you have really looked at who you are and what in your history brought you to do the things that you did in your family, in your culture, in your environment, and then what you actually did in detailed accounting, and then what were the impact of that on other people, short term on the person you harmed, and then actually apologizing. And I think people are so scared that they're going to give away something when in fact you only get back from apologizing. You only get free. You only get to become more of yourself and more connected to other people and more able to love. And I think we need to really begin to look at why it is so hard in this culture to reckon with or apologize. I mean, I think it's embedded into the DNA of America and into patriarchy.
Well, I could go into a fugue state discussing that with you, but right now I'm picturing non-apology as a tent pole, right? In the tent of patriarchy. May all the poles come down, and I hope we get to dance on the remains when it's all over.
Yes, indeed.
I'll be there with you. I do want to ask my means of drawing our conversation to a close, and thank you so much for your generosity with me in conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about reckoning, or any other thought you'd like to continue that we've generated together?
I think what I really want to say is that reckoning is not to be feared, and just to take responsibility for your part in whatever you have played is the greatest liberation. And to find the people that you can trust, who you can begin a process of reckoning with, whatever it is, whatever that thing is that burns and keeps you up at night, that you just don't want to address. Or when you read about the history of this country and you turn it off because you feel so guilty or bad, or that thing that white people always say, for example, well, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Well, you actually were there because you were living off all the remains and benefits of what happened. And your position in this society, or your wealth, or your privilege, or your power is direct result of the exploitation, oppression, desecration, lynching, and hurting of African Americans who came before you. And that doesn't mean you beat yourself up and throw yourself on the ground. It means you look at it and then you work with your life to become anti-racist, to make sure it's not being perpetuated again, to change whatever the story is in your own DNA so that you can be part of what is moving the world in another direction.
V, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today on Fully Booked.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to talk to you.